Welcome back to the Future of Figure Skating. My name's Anna Keller, and today's my conversation is with Drew Meekins. Drew is a coach and choreographer based in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and together with Natalia Mishkuntenok, he runs M&M Pairs. He coaches U.S. champions Ellie Kim and Danny O'Shea, the junior world champions Olivia Flores and Luke Wang, and teams from 8 skating nations. He's also involved in choreography and coaching for the single skaters at the World Arena, most notably with Elyce Lin-Gracey. Drew was the 2006 Junior World Champion with his pairs partner, Julia Vlassov. We talked about the role of artistry in the sport and the challenges of growing the pairs discipline, and I hope that you enjoy the conversation.
So, Drew, welcome to the podcast. I'm glad to get to talk with you a little bit more outside of the competition setting. How has the season been going for you so far?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's great to be here with you. Thanks for having me. The season has been honestly kind of exhausting at the moment, which is a weird thing to say. Well, we're in the last day of September, but even this early into it, um, I think just the way things turned out with challengers and junior Grand Prix and other things. I had a lot. Of events kind of like back to back to back to back. Hopefully this will be my busiest stretch of that, but it's been exhausting, although I'm excited to get a few weeks at home before we get into the Grand Prix.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite part of sort of the cycle of like choreography or training or competition season? Is there a part of that that you get the most from?
Um Honestly, I kind of I like it all. I mean, I know that's like kind of a lame answer, but I do like it all. And the reason is I like the diversity of it. I like that there's an importance and an intensity to each phase, but it's different, right? Like strategizing the music and the choreography and the costumes is really important and also, really intense, but in a total different way than, trying to optimize performance for a certain event and doing all of the planning and the training plans and that kind of work. So, I like it all. I mean, I think I really gravitate towards strategy, and I like that aspect of the sport a lot. So anything that I can kind of geek out about, what might be the best way to approach things, is something that I'm into.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think it's really interesting that you are both a very serious choreographer working with a lot of different teams and single skaters, and also a head coach for some top level pair teams here and have been with single skaters in the past as well. And what makes you want to do both of those things, which it's not unique, but certainly less common
Yeah.
than people who specialize one way or the other?
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's a few things. I mean, I think a big part of it, honestly, has just been like the timing of the different opportunities I've had in my coaching career. When I first started coaching, I've always really been a coach at the World Arena in Colorado Springs, and so there's a lot of high level coaches there. And when I first started coaching, honestly, the only like avenue I had towards working like at all was through choreography and through movement. And there just was a need for that. And although there were, were and are some great choreographers there, there were less of those than there were technicians. So that's kind of how I got my start and got a lot of experience and just learned a lot of the basics of coaching that you have to learn regardless of whether you're a choreographer or a technician or a singles coach or a pairs coach. So that was a big part of it. But honestly, like I love both parts of it. I I always have loved that about skating. I loved that as a skater. I've loved it as a fan, and I don't know. I really subscribe to the mindset of like, why should I limit myself? Just because it's not common to do both. Why should I feel that way? Right? I'm going to try, and if I can and if I'm good at it and people, you know, want to have me in those roles, then I'll keep doing it.
How much time do you spend with, the skaters that maybe that you're choreographing for, that you're not as part of their coaching team, working with them after the initial program is done? Because I think a lot of the skaters that you work with also are those who train at the World Arena.
Yeah. So for example, like with Elyce Lin-Gracey, I work with her nearly every day. And I choreographed her short program. And um so it depends, but you know, for her and what her, her head coach Tammy Gamble wants. We work every day, and I work on the choreography. Help her run the program with elements, with jumps sometimes, and just kind of approach training her and training the program like maybe more from the choreographic side, but still
Mhm.
as a whole package, right? I still give her feedback on how I feel she could get better GOE on her double axel or, her spins or whatever. Um, so, but there's some, it varies a bit. Like I said, with her, it's almost every day. But with some skaters, it might be more as needed, for changes or larger things. And then of course I have some skaters and teams who don't live in Colorado, who I don't see much. I choreographed for a new US pair, Audrey Shin and Balazs Nagy, and they train in Canada with Bruno Marco. And so I see them every once in a while when they're back in the springs. And I've worked with them on FaceTime a little bit for some touch ups and things. But like, because they live across, well, not just the country, but in another country, um, I don't get to see them very often.
Yeah, I always think that there must be an advantage. I mean, sometimes you would like to work with outside choreographers, but that there must be a real advantage for the teams that can integrate their choreography in with their coaching and with their regular practice and keep developing it and integrating it into the full package of the programs.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely my preference. And I think that idea impacts my work as a head pairs coach a lot. Because I think I sort of started in this avenue of, training skaters like Mirai Nagasu and Vincent Joe and Karen Chen, this kind of what I like to call like holistic way. I
Mhm.
think that has really impacted the way that I train my para athletes who I am, head coach of or at least co-coach with a lot of them with Natalia Mishkuntenok and also technical coach. So um yeah, I mean, I think that way of training has a huge advantage to it. I mean, when you compete, when you perform, you don't get to focus on one or the other. And you have to deliver a package that is fully integrated between both sides. And although that sounds obvious, if you really think about it, most people do not approach their training that way. They have a coach who is really focused on one or the other, and they train each side maybe at different times, but not always like with the mindset of putting it all together, for one fully integrated performance. So I really think there's a big advantage to training that way, to having somebody kind of watch and look at and be able to give feedback with that sort of lens on.
Yeah. So you mentioned your co-coach, and so tell me a little bit about how you organize your group and who works with different teams, and sort of how do you share that work among coaches?
Yeah, well, so Natalia and I work very closely together. You know, uh, I mean, as far as how we delegate things, I think we both do a lot of the same work, but like sort of in different ways or with different perspectives. I mean, obviously the big one being the male and female perspective, which, in pairs is pretty relevant, because we have different lived experiences, right? Like I was always the man in the team and she
Mhm.
was always the woman. So I think that there's that side of things. It's nice to have that, I think, within a pair school. Technically, we do share a bit of the similar technical philosophy because my coaches studied under Tamara Moskvina,
Mhm.
which of course she did as well. So, we do share a lot of similar philosophy as far as technique goes. So that's really nice. Um, choreographically, we do we share a bit of the workload. I choreograph for maybe a few more of the teams than she does, but she also works on the choreography and has choreographed full programs for some of our teams as well. So I don't know. I mean, there's no really hard sort of rules with it, but we just kind of pick up each other's slack and fill in the gaps where we can.
No, it seems like a great team, and I really appreciate what you're saying about the different perspectives. It's definitely something that I've noticed working with coaches who it's just if you have you're going to teach a death spiral or notice things differently if you're the one
Absolutely.
who's been in the pivot role or the one who's been being down in the position. So
Yeah,
anyway,
absolutely. Yeah. So it's been really great to have her and have her perspective. I mean, she has tons of knowledge and of course tons and tons of competitive experience at a high level successfully, obviously. And she's so easy to work with actually. She's so even tempered and very consistent. And uh, that's really important for me because I don't know. I think I'm actually probably a little more emotional than her, actually, like with how I work. So it's good that we have both sides.
yeah, yeah. No, and I think that's also really interesting what you were saying about having gotten some of the same, um, technical background. One of the things that I always find really interesting is when you can sort of trace those almost like lineages of what people have learned and brought on from their coaches, and sort of you can sometimes realize, like, even a couple of, like, teaching generations back, there will be
Yeah.
things that people have gotten in common.
Yeah. Yeah. It's cool. I mean, honestly, I think well, at least for me, like my coaching, philosophy, background, technique, whatever you want to call it. I mean, it's been formulated through so many things at this point. I mean, a big one, of course, was what I learned and did as a skater, but you know, that's just one piece of the puzzle. But it's interesting that we do have a little bit of something in common with that with that's sort of technique that originated with Moskvina.
Mhm.
But yeah, it is interesting in general, like kind of where all of that sort of comes from. It's such a conglomerate of so many things I don't even think I could explain where it's all from.
I think I read that you were somebody who had always wanted to do pairs, and that's kind of unusual, I guess, that we often find people come into it later on. But I'm just
Yeah.
curious, yeah, what drew you to pairs as a skater, and I guess also now as a coach, just to be making that your specialty?
Sure. I mean, it's like hard to say. Like, I did always want to do pairs. I mean, uh, when I first, like, I just always was obsessed with the Olympics. And, even before I even started figure skating, I would like organize mock Olympics, like with my siblings and my neighbors, like in the backyard. And I'd make everybody compete in like any event I could, you know, imagine. And one of the things that I did was like I made skating routines with my sister, like where we would just like spin around in our socks, and I would try to lift her or something. And I don't know. So I kind of feel like that might be the origin of why I wanted to do pairs. And then of course I started skating, and I don't know, I just was always drawn to it. My first coach told me, well, you can't do pairs until you get a double axel. So I was like, okay, well, I guess I have to, suffer through single skating until I can do that. But yeah, no, I just always was really drawn to it. I mean, I'm not sure there's like a really, super concrete reason. As a coach, I think I mean, same thing. Like I'm drawn to it, so I've wanted to coach it. But I think that honestly, like in pair skating, I've had this desire to give it a little bit of a refresh or a rebrand. And I think that has motivated me a lot. And I think that's kind of why I really wanted to start a pair school and become a pairs coach. And when I had the opportunity to do that, I went after it.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about that. What do you mean by a refresh for pairs?
Well, I think that you know, I I think there have been skaters in other disciplines who have really inspired me. I think the biggest discipline where I've seen that is probably ice dancing. It's really changed over the last few Olympic cycles, and I love how high the level is, and also just how innovative and um, modern and current, a lot of it is. And that doesn't just mean like stylistically or what music choices people have, because I think even people who skate to classics or, older pieces still have this look about how they move that is so, I don't know, it's so in tune with what the rest of the artistic world is doing. And I think you've had a few skaters like this in freestyle. I mean, I think Patrick Chan was like one of the ones that comes to mind for me. But anyways, what I'm saying is, in pairs, I think there's been less of it. Of course, there have been some, and they're great. But I think there's this opportunity in pair skating to really, I think, take it into kind of the current world. um and so I think I've been really interested in that, as well as just like kind of showcasing what I would call like my vision of what pair skating could be, of course technically, but really artistically.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I notice about your teams, and I'm thinking about Ellie and Danny here, but also Olivia and Luke, that they're really telling stories with their programs and that they're not just skating element to element, which I think
Sure.
is one of the things that's really can be really hard in pairs because
Yeah.
there's not that much time and the elements take a long time
Yeah.
to set up
They
and
do.
but I do notice some of that attention to the details and that the transitions don't feel like, they don't feel like an afterthought to the program, but something that's very core to the choreography.
Well, first of all, thank you. It's definitely the intention, and so I'm glad that you see that. Yeah, it was so funny. So at Junior Worlds this past season, I forget if it was Naomi and Lachlan or Olivia and Luke, but they were asked, oh, you guys train with Ellie Cam and Danny O'Shea, and you're both here on the podium. Like, how are all of you boys so expressive? And it was so funny. They kind of laughed, and they said something about Natalia and I, but that really, like, I think that was like the best like moment of that week. I mean, not maybe not, because they won medals and that was great too, but like it was just such a funny moment. I was so proud of that, because it's like the opposite of what you hear a lot of the time, especially at developing levels in pair skating. And so, I was really proud of that. But, more so, I think, I don't know, like, I mean, I think pair skating can be many things, and they all are beautiful and they all are valid. And, I'm not trying to say that like one's better than the other, but, I think you take a team like Ellie and Danny who have this, you know, kind of classic in a way, like extreme power and delicate grace, between the two of them. And the way that they play off each other with that, the way that they both contribute to that, from both sides is just, I think, really stunning and mesmerizing and captivating. And we've tried really hard to showcase that in their skating, all of it. And then you have a team like Olivia and Luke who are pretty atypical. They actually have a bit of the opposite qualities, like as far as the man and the woman in the team. And Olivia is so powerful and so strong and so reliable and consistent. And Luke is so emotional and expressive and nuanced and flexible and all these things, right? And so, you know, I've tried really hard to highlight their strengths as well, even though it's totally different. And I think it's great. There's a place for all of that in skating, but also certainly in pair skating, and I think it's what makes it interesting. Not all teams have to look the same, but also at the same time, I think it's important to show what you're strong at, what you're unique at, what you're memorable at.
Yeah, absolutely. Given that, how do you think about putting teams together? Because I think that sometimes there's, like, the formula that I've, had described to me. It's like, well, you try to find, the tallest guy and the shortest girl, and you put them together, and if you're lucky, they can both do a triple jump, and then you're good. You've got it's like, obviously, there's a lot more to it than that, but I think this is even just thinking about, like, the sort of roles that each partner plays, that there are these sort of archetypes to try to fit people into, but clearly that's not the only type of team that can be successful. So then when you are putting a team together, what do you look for?
I mean, well, it's so complicated because, like, honestly, like, I wish that I could come back and say, oh, I have so many options of like available, males and females to pick from, but that's not really the case. I mean, normally you might have like one or two options for each skater. So I don't, from that standpoint, there's not really that much choice. But I will say there's always a look, there's always a look of how um, a team is on the ice together. And it might take a few days or a few weeks to kind of see it, but like to me, that's kind of the the kind of the fun part, right? Is like figuring out what if they have that look, then figuring out kind of what it is, And so I think it takes skaters who understand their own style and their own point of view on the ice, but also who are able to listen, with their bodies to their partners and kind of work with that and play off of that. And I think if you have that, you can get something special. And so I think that's what I look for more than anything. But then I think what you make of it can be so different, right? You have to have a vision, but one team can end up really different from the next.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that I've noticed is that there's often we don't see that many teams that get together in juniors end up, sticking it out. And maybe that's because of just they may develop in different ways or just partnerships may not last that much. Um, but I've noticed that some of the most successful teams are the ones that do stick together for a long time, and so that's obviously gotta you have to have a really strong basis for a partnership to do that. I guess, how do you know, and this is gonna be another, like, not a simple answer question, but how do you know when you're thinking, I'm not sure if this is gonna work anymore," maybe it's time to consider a different partnership, or so this isn't working out, versus when you say, this is maybe a rough patch, but we're gonna stick through it and try to, persevere for the long term.
Well, I mean, so I don't know. I mean, like an example that comes to mind is with Ellie Cam before she started skating with Danny. She had a her first partner, and he is a great guy and was a good skater and all of that stuff. So it wasn't like anything super, off or scandalous, but it was just that they had sort of different like different values about what they wanted to get out of their careers and also how they wanted to go about a training session. And you know I think that was tough for Ellie. I think she felt like, even though there are things that she really liked and was gaining from the partnership, it was a bit of a mismatch as far as that. And I think when she had the opportunity to skate with Danny, she was so relieved and excited because she could tell right away that they were the same that way, right? So I think to answer your question, that's maybe the biggest thing. I think it's like I think you can, there's a lot of benefit to sticking it out through hard moments. But there are some things that, might be harder to change regardless of time. And I think one of those might be like just kind of your approach, your values to what you want to do on the ice, what you want to do on a session, that kind of thing. So honestly, that's sort of how I would answer it. I mean, I always try to give my skaters guidance, but ultimately I like them to have the power and to be the ones in control of their, sort of their destiny and their careers. So what I mean by that is, I'm happy to give them guidance, but if they want to end a partnership or go in a different direction, that's a choice they have to make.
Hmm. Yeah. When you're putting together, a new team, and I was thinking about this, especially when there's teams that have a bigger gap in age and experience. How do you, try to set that up so that that gap doesn't become something unbalanced in the partnership?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think Ellie and Danny are an example of that for sure. You know, when I mean they do have a large gap in age, right? And initially they had a large gap in experience. But you know, I think what I really was looking for was could they work with it? Could they work together? And they could. I mean, I think Ellie is the kind of skater who, like, if you give her an opportunity, she's going to go for it and she is going to make it happen. And in a way, the bigger the opportunity she gets, I think the better she becomes. And Danny has so much experience. He is so evolved as a partner, as a person, as a skater, that I think he really knew how to approach that situation and how to kind of like find this really delicate balance of like sort of nurturing Ellie as a skater, but also like being an equal with her, right? Which is so essential to a healthy partnership. And it's evolved over the last 2 years that they've been skating together, but that was really a dynamic we had at first. And as far as like age and stuff like that, I mean, I don't know. Again, it's like I don't have any hard and fast rules. I mean, I think I also wondered if they would look strange together or something like that, right? Just based on the age. But when I saw them skate, I didn't have any worries anymore. And with all the people initially who said like, "Oh, well, it's going to look strange," or something like that, I just felt confident when you see them skate, you won't feel that. And and I don't think it matters because if you think of art, like you don't have to be exactly who you are portraying, right? I mean, it's so antiquated, I think, actually, to think that, oh, you have to be the same age as your character or the same, you know, I don't know, even like race or sex. Like I think it's very antiquated to feel that way. And I think with Ellie and Danny, like when they skate, it doesn't really matter their age difference. They're able to express a feeling that I think is conveyed by them as a team that feels really authentic and natural and real. And that to me is what matters.
Yeah, I really felt like I could see that and thinking about having talked to them at Worlds about how they really felt like their process and their relationship and how they can support each other has evolved. And then I was thinking about that watching their hard free skate at Nebelhorn where and I was not able to watch it live, so I had the benefit, I think, of watching it knowing that there were going to be the falls and there was gonna be a hard skate, and so then as I was watching it, I was thinking about, A, how much trust that Ellie had in Danny to still go full for every element, with no hesitation, and then to that I could see, in that moment where maybe he was feeling a little bit shaken, that it was almost that she was supporting him and that went with the program, and so I ended up feeling like, "Oh, wow, this was actually kind of an" by the end of the program, that it was carrying that kind of emotion with it, and it was a really cool thing to see even in the middle of, like, not the skate that anyone would want to have, uh, that they, were, able to keep going together, and I think it really is a testament to that relationship as a team.
Yeah, I mean, I of course we felt lots of things after that performance, but when we met the next morning and we were debriefing, the thing that they brought that up right away. I mean, they said that they felt like, although of course they wouldn't wish to have had that experience, right? They did feel like it really um did make them, feel even stronger about their relationship and their connection and their trust, and just seeing how they've evolved over, I mean, that, I think September is like exactly 24 months of their partnership. So even though they're in their third season, it's still 2 years, or just over now, I guess. And so just looking at the way they've evolved in those 2 years, as far as that, trust, communication, um, all of those things, it's really incredible. But yeah, that was definitely a takeaway they had as well from that competition.
Yeah, yeah. I was thinking about I've had conversations with a number of um, women who are in dance and in pairs who have talked about sort of the almost inevitable struggle that can come with knowing that there are many more of you than there are of your partner, just in the sense that we have a sport that has so many more women than men in it. And then what, they're saying, "Well, we know that the women talk about this. Are the men in pairs or dance aware that they kind of come in with this kind of relative privilege in that way?" Because I think that's not about, you can have a great dynamic within any partnership, but that there's sort of that larger factor in the sport, that can add to things. And so I'm curious, just from whether you as a skater or as a coach, ever felt like, that was a dynamic that you thought about or talked about, or if it's just sort of under the radar?
Well, I mean, honestly, I think the way that comes up for me is more just in a way of trying to shut it down, I guess. I think that a really great partnership is based on this feeling of equality between the partners. Your roles are different. Your strengths can be different. Um, but in so many ways, right? On and off the ice, communication, athleticism, millions of things, right? But when you go out there to have the true trust that it takes to give a really special performance, you have to feel like you're doing it together and like you are equal in that responsibility and that role. And so, what I think is important is actually not perpetuating that this kind of feeling that somebody is more valuable or a greater commodity or something like that. I mean, there is a reality to the fact that yeah, there are more women in this sport than men, but I think it's important to, I don't know, like I said, to not perpetuate any sort of feeling of inequality or anything like that when you have a team.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think that's yeah, it's been interesting, like I was saying, to have some of those conversations with people who could say, I had it, once I found the right partner, then I didn't feel that way anymore. But in an earlier part of your career, while looking for a partner, maybe not being in as good of a partnership, that those things can come up and be pretty toxic. So good to shut it down. Um, while I'm asking you all of the hard questions about pairs, and really I'm going to say that the reason I'm asking all of these sort of devil's advocate questions is because I love pairs and I want to see it grow and I want to see it grow in popularity among skaters and the audience. And so part of what I've been asking myself, okay, what are some of the barriers to that? Um and I think one of the things that does come up both from potential skaters perspective, but I think even more so from an audience perspective is this fear of injury and this sense that like I don't like to watch it because it scares me that somebody's going to get hurt on the ice or that people are going to get really hurt. And so I know that some of that, like, it's a sport, people get injured, like, that's somewhat of an inevitable part of it, but I'm just curious how you think about safety and training and safety and competition and that sort of balance between pushing for, like, the risk of these high value elements and everything else.
Well, I think there's two parts to this, two main parts. I mean, I think one is communication between all the parties, right? And so I think, you have to have great communication between the coach and between both of the athletes involved in the pair team to understand where they're at, both physically and mentally. Um, you know, that's such a big part of preventing injury, even with skills that are not necessarily dangerous, right? I think just like understanding where your athlete's at, because the main thing that leads to injury is fatigue, which
Mhm.
causes improper technique. And so if you're not fatigued and you're doing your technique correctly, you don't get injured. I mean, that's just not how it works, right? And it's obvious to say that, but it's also, I think, really important to understand that as a coach, right? Because that can really help you know when you need to push and when you don't. So that's one thing. And I think the second thing is like, there is a safe way to work on all skills. And that doesn't mean that you'll complete them successfully every time. That doesn't mean that you will not fall on a variety of skills, right? I mean, jumps, of course, throws, but death spirals, you know, even, you know, twists sometimes, right? Or lifts. I mean, there is a safe way to work on all elements. And I think if you um understand that and have that mindset and you stay within that frame, then I think it's really reasonable and possible to work on these things and even have a bit of trial and error through them, but
Mhm.
to do it safely. Um, and so those are kind of like my sort of guiding. things when I think about safety with pair skating.
Yeah, and it's been interesting. I was watching and thinking about some of the ways that I see people train now versus when I was a kid, that even just the fact that we see people wear like the crash pants now, I feel like was not a thing as commonly. And I've even talked to some people, who are trained synchro who will wear helmets while they're working on a new lift or that kind of thing, which, at first I thought, oh, that's odd, but it's yeah. Yeah, and so, like, thinking it's interesting to kind of see how that thinking can evolve around, like, what is, a valuable part of the training process or a learning process.
I mean, every complex skill starts with small steps, right? So I think that's a big part of it. And just like you go from a walkthrough to a single to a double to a triple to a quad, I mean, you don't start with a level four, you know, lift, right? You're working your way through that in these ways that even seem you know microscopic at times, right? I also think another really great part about having a pair school like we have here in Colorado is that we have athletes of um, a variety different of experience levels, and they can really help with the learning process. So a lot of the older guys will help teach the younger girls things, and because there's such a big difference in strength, or size, they can really help them learn things like very safely. It's almost like being in the harness for a jump or something like that, right? Like
Mhm.
when you have a Danny O'Shea, helping a developing team that might be intermediate or novice, they really can learn that safely with his assistance. As well as just like honestly, like like spotting each other and things like that when we were learning lifts, and so that is a nice sort of benefit of having a larger group to train with, and we definitely take advantage of that at our school.
I just have 2 more questions for you. One is something I know we talked a little bit about this at Worlds, but, we just saw the introduction and then postponement of rule changes for pairs to have and for well, to have the choreographic elements and taking out the POC, all of those pieces, and then that's postponed until after the Olympics, and I I'm curious think about, from a rule perspective, how we can encourage the kind of individuality and your vision of Paris, something that it has that modern feel.
So yeah, I mean, I really believe that the ISU is also thinking of this with these proposed changes. I've heard that the ISU has an initiative to help increase viewership and you know uh prospective fans through kind of modernizing in a way the sport and the different disciplines. And my understanding is that part of these changes are geared at adding more opportunities for variety, but also more opportunities for elements that fans want to see. Um, and I think a big example of that is like the backflip, right? Like, this was something that was always so popular in shows and and other things, and always made crowds go wild, but it was prohibited for so long, right? So I think in pair skating, you're seeing a similar thing with some of these larger rule changes with program content, which are going to allow like more opportunities for creativity, but also more opportunities for elements that um, are really eye catching. I think that allowing these sort of elements where you have more opportunities for creativity, um, which then will bring more sort of diversity to how programs look, I think is a really good thing for the sport. I think it's something that the fans will appreciate, and I think it's a way to inject some of this creativity back into skating. I mean, I think, IJS has um, been great in a lot of ways. I think it's made the sport a lot more competitive and it's pushed boundaries a lot. But I think the main criticism you hear is that as people catch on to what scores high, things start to look the same because everybody wants to score high. And so I think, this sort of evaluation point we're at of like, okay, how do we keep the positive things of this, but also inject these opportunities for more creativity is really the way we need to go.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I agree, even though I sometimes I worry that the choreo elements are going to also all start to look the same, but that is that's more a question of the judging and the, everything else than it is a question of the rule itself.
Well, we'll see, right? And I think, you know, I mean, honestly, like, I don't think anything is going to be a one size fits all fix forever, right? I
Yeah.
think this kind of sport, like, sort of requires these recalibration moments every so often. So, I wouldn't be shocked if we have more of these in the future, right? But I do think I'm glad that we're having them. I'm glad that we're having conversations about what do we need to have more opportunities for creativity, what do we need to you know get elements and programs and choreography that are more engaging to audiences. I think these are good conversations, so I'm glad we're having them.
That's great. Yeah, well, and that's a perfect segue to what I always like to end the podcast with the nice big open question of what you hope for from the future of figure skating.
Oh wow. um hmm. I mean, I think that I think the main thing I hope for is a way for more people to enjoy it. Whether that's athletes or fans or what have you. I think that skating is a great sport. It's like been the love of my life in so many ways, and I love it. And I wish that other people would have the opportunity to enjoy it and love it as I do. And so I think, getting more people into the sport, I think helping people who are in it really find their place and their voice. And I think also opportunities to showcase it to fans to make it more, palatable for them, enjoyable for them. That's really what I would like.
Great. Thank you so much, Drew. This has been a really interesting conversation, and I really appreciate all of the work that you're doing for the sport.
Well, you're so welcome. It's been a lot of fun to chat with you. So thank you for that opportunity.
Thanks again to Drew Meekins for joining me on the podcast. You can follow him on Instagram at Drew_Meekins and on Blue Sky at Drew-Meekins. M&M Pairs is also on Instagram at MMPairs. You can reach me with comments or suggestions by email at fsfuturepodcast@gmail.com or on Instagram and Twitter at FutureFSPodcast, also on Blue Sky at Future of FS. If you appreciate the podcast, you can also support my work with a tip jar at futurefigureskating.pinecast.co. Remember to share the podcast with your friends and leave a review. You can find us on all of the podcast platforms and on YouTube.